Story 1. The isolated rest stop. It was one of those endless road trips, the kind where you feel like the highway will never end. I had been driving for hours on a stretch of backroads, long past any sign of civilization, with nothing but dark trees and empty fields on either side. The radio was cutting in and out, my phone had lost service an hour ago, and my eyelids felt like they weighed a ton. I knew I needed to stop, at least for a little while. The next rest stop was miles away, but finally, after what felt like forever, I saw a small, flickering sign for one just ahead. I pulled off the road, more out of necessity than comfort. It was the kind of place that gave you the creeps the moment you saw it. A small, dimly lit parking lot with a rundown restroom building. The paint was peeling off the walls, and the single street light flickered like it was about to go out any second. I parked near the building, hoping to just stretch my legs and use the restroom before getting back on the road. As soon as I got out of the car, a cold breeze hit me, sending a chill down my spine. I tried to shake off the uneasy feeling and headed toward the restroom. The inside was even worse than I expected. The lights were dim, buzzing faintly overhead, casting long, eerie shadows on the stained tile floor. The air smelled like mildew, and the whole place seemed like it hadn't been cleaned in years. I quickly stepped into one of the stalls, wanting to get in and out as fast as possible. As I was in the stall, I heard the door creak open. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe someone else was passing through. But then I realized I hadn't seen any other cars. Not one. I froze, holding my breath, listening. The door didn't shut. Instead, I heard slow, deliberate footsteps moving across the restroom floor, the kind of steps someone takes when they know you're there, but they don't want you to know they're watching. My heart began to race. The footsteps stopped right outside the stall door. I didn't dare move. I could see the shadows of their feet, just beyond the crack at the bottom. Whoever it was, they weren't moving. They were just standing there, waiting. I bit my lip, trying to keep quiet, but every instinct I had screamed at me to do something. I decided to act as if I didn't notice them. I flushed the toilet, pulled up my pants, and stood there, facing the stall door, hand on the lock. I needed to time this perfectly. My hand trembled as I slid the lock open, and in one motion, I shoved the stall door hard and bolted out. Whoever had been standing there wasn't expecting it. I heard a grunt, and as I sprinted toward the exit, I caught a glimpse of a man, tall, wearing a dirty jacket, his face mostly hidden beneath a hood. He was staggering back, trying to regain his balance. I didn't look back as I slammed through the door, my heart in my throat. I sprinted toward my car, the adrenaline fueling my legs. But then I heard it, heavy footsteps behind me, pounding the pavement, getting closer. I fumbled for my keys as I reached the car, yanking the door open just in time to dive inside. I hit the lock button, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped the keys. The figure was right there, banging on the window, his face twisted into something both human and monstrous. His fist slammed into the glass, and for a split second, I thought it was going to shatter. I jammed the key into the ignition and turned it. The car roared to life, and I floored the gas pedal, tires screeching as I tore out of the parking lot. My heart was pounding in my ears, but I couldn't stop looking in the rearview mirror. The man was standing in the middle of the road, watching me drive away, his figure shrinking into the darkness as I sped down the highway. I didn't stop again. Not for miles. Not until I reached the next town, where I finally pulled into a well-lit gas station. I sat there, hands gripping the wheel, trying to catch my breath. My mind kept replaying the scene over and over again, wondering what would have happened if I had been just a second slower. To this day, I won't stop at rest areas. I don't care how tired I am or how late it is. I'll drive through the night before I ever risk that again. Because somewhere out there, in the middle of nowhere, that man is still waiting. And I'm terrified he wasn't just looking for a random victim, but for me. Story 2. The Highway Stalker. It was just past midnight, and I had been driving for hours, determined to make it to my destination by dawn. The highway was mostly empty, the kind of deserted road that made you feel like the only person in the world. The occasional distant headlights were the only reminder that other drivers existed. I was somewhere in the middle of nowhere, flatlands stretching for miles on either side, interrupted only by dark, looming forests that edged the road. I had the windows down, hoping the cool night air would keep me awake, but my eyelids were starting to feel heavy. I was seriously considering pulling over for a quick nap when I noticed something in my rearview mirror. A pair of headlights, way back but approaching fast. No big deal, I thought. Just another late-night driver. But something about the way those headlights were coming at me didn't sit right. The car wasn't just approaching, it was barreling toward me. In seconds, the headlights were right behind me, blindingly bright in my mirror. I shifted uncomfortably in my seat, squinting against the light. "What the hell?" I muttered, my pulse quickening. The car behind me was riding my bumper, close enough that I could almost feel the heat from its engine. It didn't honk or try to pass. It just stayed there, relentlessly close, like it was hunting me. I tapped my brakes, hoping to send a message. "Back off." No response. The car stayed glued to my rear bumper, its headlights flashing in my mirrors like a threat. My hands tightened around the steering wheel, adrenaline spiking. This wasn't some careless driver. This felt deliberate, menacing. My foot pressed harder on the gas. The road stretched ahead, and I floored it, determined to lose them. The engine roared as my speedometer climbed past 80, then 90. But the car behind me wasn't letting up. If anything, it seemed to enjoy the chase. The headlights bobbed and weaved as the driver stayed just inches behind, matching my every move. It was clear now. This wasn't random. Whoever was in that car was toying with me. I glanced at the fuel gauge. Just under a quarter tank left. No way was I going to last much longer at this speed. Panic started to set in. My mind raced with options. Pull over, stop and confront them, try to outrun them, but none of them seemed like they would end well. Suddenly, the road curved sharply. I swung the wheel hard to stay on course, tires screeching as I barely made the turn. But the car behind me didn't falter. It followed me flawlessly, its lights still glaring in my rearview mirror. Up ahead, the road split a fork. One path led to more of the same desolate highway. The other veered into the dense woods, a narrow road that looked barely wide enough for a single car. I made a split-second decision and swerved onto the wooded road, hoping it would slow them down or at least give me some cover. The trees closed in around me, thick and dark, their branches reaching over the road like claws. My headlights barely cut through the blackness, and I could hear the crunch of gravel under my tires as I sped deeper into the forest. But when I looked in the rearview mirror, the headlights were still there. That car was relentless, its engine growling as it chased me through the trees. My heart was pounding in my chest, every muscle tensed as I navigated the narrow, winding road. I knew I couldn't keep this up. The path was too tight, the turns too sharp. I needed to lose them, but every time I glanced back, those headlights were closer. Suddenly, I saw a break in the trees, an old logging road, barely visible, leading deeper into the woods. Without thinking, I yanked the wheel and veered onto it, tires skidding on the loose dirt. The car behind me didn't hesitate. It followed, its headlights bouncing wildly as it tore over the rough terrain. Branches scraped against the sides of my car, and the road narrowed even more, forcing me to slow down. My breathing was ragged, my hands slick with sweat. I glanced back again, and that's when I saw it. The other car had finally pulled alongside me, the driver's face just barely visible through the darkness. My heart nearly stopped. A man, pale and gaunt, his eyes wide and unblinking, stared straight at me. He wasn't looking at the road. He was looking at me, his mouth curled into a sick grin. Fear shot through me like electricity, and before I knew it, he swerved hard, smashing into the side of my car. The impact jolted me, nearly sending me off the road. I fought to keep control, my car swaying wildly as I hit the brakes and spun out onto the dirt shoulder. I came to a stop, my heart pounding, breathing hard as I stared at the other car. It had stopped just ahead of me, idling in the middle of the road. The man was still grinning, watching me through his side mirror, like he was daring me to move. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I threw my car into reverse, tires spinning as I peeled out and sped backward, away from him, back down the narrow logging road. I slammed the wheel hard, spinning the car back toward the highway, my only hope to escape. As I hit the main road, I saw the car's headlights flare back to life. It was coming for me again, engine roaring, but I floored it. The speedometer climbed past 90, past 100, my car rattling under the strain. I couldn't see much beyond the blur of trees and the dark road stretching ahead, but I didn't care. I just needed to get away. For what felt like an eternity, I kept going, my heart racing as I glanced in the mirror over and over. The headlights were still there, but finally, after miles of relentless pursuit, they began to fade. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down until I saw the bright lights of a small gas station up ahead. I pulled in, tires screeching, and practically jumped out of the car, looking back down the road. No headlights. No sign of the car. I stood there in the harsh fluorescent light, trying to catch my breath, trembling with the aftershock of adrenaline. My car was battered, scratches down the side, a dent from where the man had rammed me. But I was alive. I never saw that car again. But sometimes, when I'm out driving late at night, I still get that same uneasy feeling like someone's watching, waiting for the right moment to start the chase all over again. Story 3. The Abandoned Car. It was supposed to be an easy road trip, a straight shot down the highway to meet up with some friends in the next state. I'd packed snacks, downloaded a few podcasts, and was fully prepared for the 6-hour drive. But about 4 hours in, something changed. The GPS took me off the highway due to roadwork, redirecting me onto a two-lane backroad that cut through endless stretches of farmland. At first, I didn't mind. The scenery was a nice break from the monotony of the highway, and the quiet road meant I could make decent time. But after a while, the road just seemed to go on forever. There were no gas stations, no houses, just fields and the occasional broken-down barn. That's when I saw it. A car pulled off to the side of the road, hazard lights blinking dimly in the distance. It was an older model sedan, pale blue, and looked like it had been sitting there for a while. There were no other cars around, no signs of life, just that one lonely vehicle. I slowed down as I passed it, curiosity getting the better of me. I glanced at the driver's seat, expecting to see someone, but it was empty. I drove a little farther before something tugged at me, a gut feeling I couldn't shake. What if someone needed help? What if they were stranded with no cell service? I turned around and pulled up behind the car, leaving my engine running as I got out. The night was creeping in by this point, a deep orange glow in the distance signaling the setting sun. I grabbed my phone and flashlight from the car and walked up to the sedan, shining my light through the windows. The interior was empty, but it wasn't right. The driver's seat was pushed all the way back, the glove compartment was open with papers strewn all over the dashboard, and the back seat looked like someone had been living there. Blankets, empty fast food containers, and a few pieces of clothing were crumpled up, like someone had been sleeping inside for days. "Hello," I called out, but the quiet that followed made my voice sound small, swallowed up by the empty fields around me. My heart started to race, and that feeling, the one that told me to turn around, was screaming at me now. Just as I was about to head back to my car, I noticed something strange. There were no tire tracks around the sedan, not even in the dirt shoulder where the car was parked. It didn't make sense. It was like the car had just appeared there, with no signs of how it got there. A shiver crawled up my spine. I turned back toward my car, quickening my pace. As I reached for the handle, something caught my eye, a figure standing just at the edge of the road, barely visible in the fading light. It was a man, or at least I thought it was. He was tall, too tall, and just stood there motionless, staring in my direction. His clothes were dark, and his face was in shadow. My breath caught in my throat. I hadn't heard anyone approach. There was no sound at all. I didn't think. I just acted. I yanked the door open, jumped inside, and locked it. My hands were shaking as I fumbled for the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I floored it, speeding back onto the road without daring to look back. My heart was pounding in my ears, my knuckles white as I gripped the steering wheel. The road stretched on, but it felt different now, darker somehow. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see something. Someone following me. I drove for miles, faster than I should have, but I couldn't stop. The memory of that figure, that abandoned car, haunted me. I knew something was wrong with that place. I could feel it in my bones. After about an hour, I finally reached a small gas station. I pulled in, breathing heavily, trying to shake the feeling of dread that had been hanging over me. The gas station was old and dimly lit, but at least there were people around. I walked inside, grabbed a bottle of water, and went to the counter, desperate for some sense of normalcy. The cashier, an older man with a grizzled beard, looked up at me with tired eyes. I forced a smile, trying to calm my nerves. "You wouldn't happen to know anything about a blue sedan a few miles back, would you?" I asked, hoping for some explanation. It was abandoned on the side of the road. Looked like someone had been living in it. His face paled. He glanced at me, then out toward the dark road beyond the station, before shaking his head slowly. "Son," he said quietly, his voice low and serious, "if you saw that car, you're lucky you didn't stop. That thing's been out there for years. Cops towed it away a dozen times, but every time, it comes back, same spot. Nobody ever sees who leaves it there. And anyone who does stop to check it out, well, they don't make it far." I stared at him, my stomach twisting in knots. I didn't say another word. I paid for the water, walked back to my car, and got back on the road. I didn't look in the rearview mirror after that. Story 4. The Stranded Driver. It was late, probably around midnight, when I found myself driving through an unfamiliar rural area. The GPS had rerouted me after I missed my turn on the highway, leading me deeper into what seemed like an endless stretch of dark, narrow country roads. The road was barely wide enough for two cars, with dense trees lining both sides, their shadows creeping across the dimly lit path. I'd been driving for hours, and exhaustion was starting to wear me down. My gas gauge was perilously low, and there wasn't a gas station or even a house in sight. My heart sank as the car's engine sputtered. I had no choice but to pull over. The engine went silent. I was stranded. I sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, staring into the blackness ahead. My phone had no signal. Of course it didn't, out here in the middle of nowhere. I considered staying in the car, waiting until morning, but a part of me felt like that was a bad idea. What if someone came? Someone with bad intentions? I couldn't just sit there a sitting duck. I grabbed a flashlight from the glove box, stepped out of the car, and started walking, hoping to find a house or a gas station nearby. The road was eerily quiet. No sounds except the crunch of gravel under my shoes and the distant rustling of leaves. Every few minutes, I'd stop, convinced I heard footsteps behind me, only to turn and find nothing but the stillness of the night. Then, after what felt like hours, I spotted a faint light in the distance. A house, finally. Relief washed over me, but the feeling was short-lived. As I got closer, something about the place felt off. The house was small, old and run down, but it wasn't just that. It felt wrong. The front yard was overgrown, and the windows were dark, except for the faint glow of a single bulb from what seemed to be the living room. I knocked on the door, my hands shaking from a mixture of fear and fatigue. No answer. I knocked again, harder this time, and then the door creaked open on its own. I hesitated. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding small in the stillness. No response. Against my better judgment, I stepped inside. The air was stale, heavy with a musty odor, like the house hadn't been lived in for years. The living room was sparsely furnished, just a single chair facing the doorway, like someone had been sitting there, waiting for me. My skin crawled. I needed to get out of there. But just as I turned to leave, I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming from the hallway deeper inside the house. I froze. My flashlight beam shook as I tried to steady my hand. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. The footsteps stopped. For a moment, everything was silent. Too silent. I felt a rush of panic. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. Suddenly, the footsteps resumed, faster this time, as if someone was charging toward me. I bolted for the door, heart pounding in my chest. Just as I reached it, the door slammed shut, and I heard a voice from behind me, low and guttural. "You shouldn't have come here." I didn't turn around. I didn't want to see who, or what, was standing behind me. Instead, I yanked the door open and sprinted back down the road, running faster than I ever thought possible. My legs burned, and my lungs felt like they were going to explode, but I didn't stop. Not until I was back in my car, panting and drenched in sweat. I fumbled for my keys, but when I looked up, I saw something that made my blood run cold. In the distance, standing at the edge of the trees, was a figure, just standing there, watching me. I didn't wait. I jumped into the car, slammed the door, and tried the ignition, praying that there was enough gas to start the engine. The car sputtered again, but finally, mercifully, it roared to life. I floored it, speeding away, my heart still racing. I didn't look back. I couldn't. But even now, I can still feel those eyes on me, watching, waiting for the moment I slip up and return to that place. If you enjoyed these stories, please like and subscribe. Also, check out my other videos.